Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Where are the two dots? Misa. Both a tam and a muar that kill somebody are both chayiv, or the animal itself is killed. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan, the Gemara was trying to bring a source for this. The Torah says the animal is stoned. Okay, if it's stoned, and obviously I know that it's an nevela. In other words, nevela asur b'achila, and a nevela it cannot be eaten. If it's stoned, it isn't slaughtered, right? And if it's not slaughtered, then you can't eat it because it's an nevela. So if that's the case, why does the Torah have to specify? Why does the Torah need to specify that you can't eat the meat? Obviously, you can't eat the meat because the animal was stoned. It's not a kosher, it's an avela. It wasn't slaughtered. So the answer is, the Torah is telling you, let's say it was slaughtered after the court ruled that it should be stoned, then it remains prohibited to eat. Okay. So I know that you can't eat it. You can't eat it in if it's stoned, obviously you can't eat it, but also if it was slaughtered, you can't eat it either. And the reason why you can't eat it is because the Torah says no matter what happens to the animal, sorry, you can't eat it, whether it was stoned or slaughtered. Okay, how do I know? A ox that's stoned also becomes prohibited to benefit from, derive benefits. Isser Hanal. How do I know that? Talmud Leimer Ubal Hashar Naki, and the owner of the ox will be clean. Well, what does that mean? My mashma. How do we see that from there? In other words, how does a statement the owner of the ox will be clean? How can we infer from there that he can't actually benefit from the ox? So Shemin Zaymer Ka'adam Sh'aymer L'Chaver Yatz Ish Plain Yakum and Chasav. So there's a phrase in English.
Position, please, Rabbi.
That's 5 lines above the wide lines.
On 40
way.
41.
Yep.
5 lines. Okay.
So there's an expression in English where if somebody robs a house, sometimes you'll hear people say they cleaned him out. What does that mean? It means they took everything. So when the Torah says the owner of the ox will be clean, it means he'll be cleaned out from his ox. I.e., there will be nothing left for him. He can't derive any benefit from his stoned ox, or whether it was slaughtered, would be the same thing. So the Gemara asks, okay, so how do we know that the prohibition to eat the animal refers to an animal that was slaughtered instead of stoned? So the court ruled the animal has to be stoned, and somebody went ahead and slaughtered it. Okay, and over there, and that the Gemara is arguing that in that instance, in that instance, the animal is prohibited both for eating and for hana, for benefits. So the Gemara asks, how do I know that is the case? 1 second. Ema, perhaps the verse refers to something else. Maybe it would be the case that only if it's stoned it's prohibited. If it's slaughtered, it would be permitted. Okay, so now you'll ask me, why does the Torah need to say that if it's stoned you can't eat it? Obviously, if it's stoned you can't eat it, right? Because if it's stoned, it's not slaughtered. You cannot eat an animal that isn't slaughtered. Sorry, so why does the Torah need to say you can't eat the flesh? Maybe the prohibition to eat doesn't really mean eating, it means deriving pleasure. Like the opinion of Rabbi Dovid Yehudah. Whenever the Torah uses the words don't eat, basically, it also includes a prohibition on benefiting. You can't benefit from it either, unless the Torah specifically exempts benefits. Where do we see the Torah did that? With regards to nevela. an animal that was not slaughtered, Torah says basically you can give it to an anjo, or you can sell to it. You can either give it or sell to an anjo. Okay. The government. In other words, the point Rabbi Vu is making is that when the Torah wants to tell you could benefit from something, the Torah tells you could benefit from it. It says you can eat it and you could benefit from it. What this teaches us is what they call what's it called, a binyanav, meaning that this teaches that when the Torah does not make an exception, then it would be prohibited not just for eating but for everything else as well. Okay. 1 second. Okay. So in other words, back to the original question. We're saying that lo yochel includes an animal that was correctly slaughtered, where it's prohibited to eat. Maybe actually an animal that's correctly slaughtered is permitted to eat. But the prohibition of lo yochel is not coming for food to eat, it's coming to derive benefit. And it's going on an animal that was stoned. So Amri, the simple resolution is Hani mili hechad nafikli isra chila ve'isra mikra milayochel. Okay. Aval hachad isra chila misaga isaga nafka isaga adachai layochel es besori isra no hu nichta rachmana layehena. Inam layochel. Sorry, normally dafka v'adi came basar the shachtai also. Okay, let's explain this. What does that mean? You can argue to me that layochel includes don't eat and don't benefit if it includes don't eat, right? In other words, if the Torah says don't eat it, you can tell me, okay, it doesn't mean just eating it, it also means don't benefit from it. But over here is backwards. How do I know you can't eat a stolen animal? I'm sorry, how do I know you can't eat a stoned animal? This is Sinavela. So loyoy. So therefore lo yochel is it doesn't make sense that the Torah would have said lo yochel to tell you can't benefit from it. It doesn't make sense. In other words, because we know that you can't eat it. So why does Torah say lo yochel? If the Torah is trying to say you shouldn't benefit, it should say lo yehena. You shouldn't derive benefits. Why does it say lo yochel? Doesn't make it. Moreover, why does it say es besori, the flesh? Right? Presumably, if we're talking about deriving benefit, we would be talking about the flesh. We can't be talking about eating. Eating, we already know. So in other words, obviously what does Torah have to repeat itself and say es besori, the flesh? Obviously, if we're talking about benefit, it's going to be the carcass of the animal. Okay. So therefore, it must be, even though, in other words, the Torah is saying lo yochel es besori, meaning even where you have flesh that is made into flesh, i.e., it was slaughtered correctly, it was slaughtered after the animal was given capital punishment by the court for killing somebody. Even if it was slaughtered correctly, you still can't eat it. You can't eat the meat, the flesh that was turned into proper meat that you normally be able to buy. Also, it's prohibited. Okay, 4, 5, 6 words on the end of the page, 7 words. Maximum Marzutra. Marzutra, the following question. Ema hani mili. Turn the page, top of the alpha base. Okay, so an interesting scenario here. Interesting suggestion by Marzutra. Okay, Marzutra is saying like this. Hechad the bodai tzur v'shachava the abdike and skila. Avlechad the shachta b'saken loy. Okay, so he's saying maybe it's false. Maybe it would be possible for an animal to be slaughtered and stoned at the same time. And how is this possible? You took a rock, you made it very sharp, and you slaughtered the animal with a rock. So it's like stoning. And that's what the Torah says it's prohibited. But if you slaughtered it with a knife, maybe it would be permitted. So the Gemara says, Amri, second line, 41b, Otu saken eksiva b'raisa, v'hotana. does the Torah specifically mention a knife in the Torah? And the answer is no. There's a few Muslim, there's a few allusions to a knife, but knife is not specifically mentioned. As a matter of fact, how does the Torah talk about shechita? How does the Torah tell you how to shecht? It's a very simple question.
Yeah.
The Torah doesn't tell you how to shecht.
Right.
The only thing the Torah, there are some allusions that are Muslim, but there's no specific instruction. The Torah says you should slaughter an animal like I have taught you. The Torah nowhere mentions exactly how to do that. Okay, regardless, you can slaughter a vatana. We learned in the Mishnah. Yad, you slaughter with some sort of sickle. Bitzur with a rock. Bekana is some sort of reed that was able to become very sharp. Shchitosek shera, the slaughter is kosher. The animal is not in nevela. Yeah, exactly. Okay. That being the case, therefore, the pasuk of L'Seichel is referring to any type of slaughter, whether the slaughter was done with a rock or with a knife. Okay. Okay, so now we have a question. We started off the Gemara saying, Ubala Sharnaki, the owner of the animal is clean. Right? What is the, by the way, this is taking us to the next page and a half, this discussion. It's a very important discussion. And not an easy one either. So it gets harder later. In the beginning, it's pretty easy. The owner of the animal is clean. What does that mean? He's clean. He's clean like the guy whose house was cleaned out yesterday by the robber. Meaning he's empty. He gets nothing. He's no benefit at all. Okay. Now, if that's the case, now we brought Rav Avu. Rav Avu says that every time it says L'Seichel, don't eat, it also means don't benefit. So now the question is, well, why do I need two sources? How do I know you can't benefit from an animal? For two reasons. First of all, Baal Sharnaki, the owner of the ox is clean, meaning he's cleaned out of his animal, he doesn't get anything. And number two, it says L'Seichel, meaning don't eat it, don't benefit from it. Okay. So if I know from L'Yeichel you can't benefit, Baal Sharnaki Lomali, why does Torah need to say the owner of the ox is cleaned out of his ox? So the Gemara says L'Hanos Oirei, for the benefit of the skins of the animal. I would think the flesh that you cannot eat, you can't benefit from it. But the skins that you couldn't eat anyway because they're not edible, maybe you could benefit from them. So therefore, the Torah has to specify the owner of the ox is clean, meaning he's cleaned out of the skins as well, not just the flesh. Okay. We'll soon see a bunch of opinions that Baal Sharnaki refers to something else completely. According to those opinions, how do they know you can't benefit from the skins? So the Gemara says, so remember we spoke about this a few times in the past. If you can darshan, you can derive things from every time the Torah uses the word es, which obviously is quite a few many times. V'haitat es ladarish. 1 second. Okay, so if you say es b'sari, what does that mean? Something that's close to the flesh. What's close to the flesh? The skins. However, the author of the Mishnah does not derive things from the word es. V'haitana es ladarish, Ketanya, like we learned, Shimon ha'amsuni v'amila Nechemia ha'amsuni, Shimon from Amson, or some say it was Nechemia from Amson. Haidarish kol esen shabbatorah. He would derive things from every es every time the Torah uses the word es. Kivan shigia la es Hashem l'kechatira. You should fear God. Es. Well, what does that mean? In other words, what exactly is like God that should be feared? Pirish, he said, there's no answer to this. There's nothing that can be feared like God except for God. So there's nothing to add in here. Amr Tamidov says, student says, Rabbi, if one S is missing, kol es shadarash tamat. If you can't figure out an answer for this S, then what's going to be with all the other S? In other words, if there's an exception to the rule, then it isn't a rule. So if you can't figure out the answer to this question, you'll have to sort of figure out why you were wrong for every other S in the Torah. Amar lahem, so Shimon responded, Kishem shkibalti schar ala trisha, kach kibalti schar ala prisha. This is sort of counterintuitive in academia, but in Torah, this is how it works. If you just like God rewards those that add on and build to Torah, kach kibalti schar ala prisha, I'll get reward for those that are sort of deconstructing the mistakes and realizing that all the essen were incorrectly derived. Okay, Achabar Rabbi Kiva, until Rabbi Kiva eventually came around and he figured out the answer. And he said, what is an example of something that should be feared like God? The Rabbi Samir Chachamim to include scholars, Torah scholars. Okay, and now we just mentioned about a minute and a half ago that there are many other opinions that differ about the words Baal Hashar Naki. The owner of the animal is clean. Now let's begin. Tana Rabbanon, Ubal Hashar Naki, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Naki Mechatzi Kaifer. The owner of the animal is clean. What does that mean? He's clean from? It means he's exempt from paying half kaifer. Okay, like we said, there is a debate whether kaifer is paid by a tam. You'd pay half kaifer then. Rabbi Eliezer says very clearly, no, there is no kaifer for a tam. Kaifer is only paid for muad. If an animal kills the tam, the animal is killed, but the owner is exempt. Okay. Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva says it's sort of self-explanatory. In other words, obviously he doesn't have to pay kaifer. Why? Because the animal, the tam only pays megufay. So so go bring it to court and collect from the animal. What Rabbi Kiva is saying here is a catch-22 problem. In other words, what's the story with this animal that stones? Can't derive benefit from it. So it's literally useless. So what's the worst case scenario that you have to pay kaifer? You can bring the dead animal into court and tell the guy, here's your useless item. Right? You can give him a broken light bulb, basically. Right? What's he supposed to do with it? What's it worth? Zero. You can't even derive benefit from the animal. Says Rabbi Kiva, you need to tell me a pasuk that I don't have to pay kaifer. I don't need a pasuk to tell me you don't have to pay kaifer. The maximum kaifer penalty is 0. Yeah, excellent question. Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, well, yeah, you're right, but there's 2 exceptions. Okay, first exception number 1. This is what you think. I haven't thought of this. What I meant to say is as follows: it's true the animal is stoned. Okay, in other words, like we explained earlier, an animal is only stoned if there are 2 witnesses. If there's only 1 witness, the animal is not stoned. Okay, fine. There's only 1 witness, but there still is a payment of kaifer. That's what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. In other words, I might have thought an animal that kills with pay kaifer, a tam that kills with pay kaifer, if the animal can't be stoned. Answer is no. The animal there's no payment of kaifer, even if there are witnesses to kill it. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer is saying my law would only be relevant, my exemption would only be relevant when it killed either through the witness of a single witness, testimony of a single witness, or if the owner saw it. So the Gemara says, it might have knasu. He's admitting to damage, therefore he should be exempt from the penalty. So the Gemara says, Kasavar kufar kapara, he holds that kaifer is an atonement. And if the owner admits his animal killed another person and there's no witnesses, then he's still allowed. You might think that he would still be allowed to pay for the atonement, and the answer is no. He can't pay for the atonement, because the Torah says Baal Hashar Naki, the owner of the ox, is exempt. He doesn't pay kaifer. Period. Tani idach. There was a second interpretation that Rabbi Eliezer gave. Kachani beinecha shedini b'zeh shechayiv misa edini el maskav l'harges behema. Okay, before we see the specifics, just summarize it. We'll get to the mission. I believe it's a mission document. Dalit. Second. Yeah. It's a bit not. I would say it's not the most intuitive thing when you start talking about the intentions of an animal. Okay, but the scenario where an animal pays kaifer is only where it clearly intended on killing somebody. I don't know, killing, maybe damaging would be enough. In other words, an animal gores somebody. It's pretty clear the animal was intending to inflict harm. Let's say it was clear the animal was intended to inflict harm, but not on a human being. So, for example, let's say it was pushing down a wall. So you might think it's a fair presumption that the ox probably never looked at the other side of the wall, right? And even if it did, it might not have remembered that there was a homeless guy there, sitting underneath the wall that was about to be stoned by the animal taking down the wall. Make sense?
Yeah.
And one of the key components in order for there to be an obligation of kaifer is that there has to be intention to harm, and it could be said that in many such scenarios there isn't an intention to harm. Okay, so that's where Rabbi Eliezer comes in. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. So in other words, Rabbi Eliezer says as follows. In other words, okay, so he intended on killing an animal, and it turns out he killed a person. He intended on killing a non-Jew, turns out he kills a Jew. He intended on killing an infant that would have died anyway. It wasn't a viable childbirth. And he killed a child that was going to live. Okay. So in other words, in all these scenarios, he's exempt from the death penalty, and you might think he has to pay kaifer. The animal has to pay kaifer. The owner of the animal pays kaifer. And the answer, says Rabbi Eliezer, is no, you don't pay kaifer. Okay, so we have two exceptions to the rule. Exception number one is where there isn't a full testimony, right? So you can't kill the animal. Maybe you pay kaifer. No, you don't pay kaifer. And exception number two is where the animal did not intend on killing a person. It intended on knocking down a wall, let's say, or killing an animal, and instead it killed a person. Where the animal is exempt from the death penalty, but you might think you would have to pay kaifer. It says Rabbi Eliezer, there's no kaifer. So now we have an interesting question. Hi, Amar Leber ratio. Which exception did Rabbi Eliezer speak about first? If Kahana Shmuel Rav Amar Mischaf, and if Kahana says the name of Rav, we're talking about where he intended on killing an animal and killed a person. That was his first argument. Or Yomi Bava Amar Himis Amar Le Bereisha. If Yomi says that he said the animal that what was he going to say? The scenario where he killed by the testimony of one person was the first scenario. Okay, so let's explain. If Kahana says we're talking about a scenario where he intends on killing an animal and ends up killing a person, that's the scenario he argued first. What's an example? There's mashal excited to show a dogam and a yam. It's like a fisherman. He catches a big fish. In other words, the better argument of Rabbi Eliezer was the argument where he intended on killing an animal and killed a person, where he's exempt from the death penalty, but still has to pay for, you would think still has to pay for kaifer. The answer Rabbi Eliezer teaches is no, he doesn't have to pay for kaifer. So that's the big fish. The small fish, that's the first scenario that we saw previously, which was actually the second of Rabbi Eliezer's arguments, where there was only one witness. So that was a small fish. So he took the small fish afterwards. Why not? If Yomi says the name of Rava, the opposite. Him is Amar Lebereisha. The animal killed with the testimony of one witness. That was his first argument. Mishkach Zutri, he found the small fish. Shakli took the small fish. Then afterwards, he thought of a better argument. Mishkach Rav, he thought of a much better argument, the big fish. The Shadi Zutri v'Shaka Rav, he threw the small fish back and took the big fish. And the big fish, obviously, that would be the argument with he intended on killing an animal and killed a person. Okay, Tanya Idach, another brisa says, Bal Hashar Naki, the owner of the ox is clean. What does that mean? Rabbi Yosef says, Naki midmei vlodes. He's clean from having to pay from the children. Okay, so let's explain. when let's say the animal gores a pregnant woman who loses her child, the owner of the animal is exempt from having to pay for the value of that child, that fetus. Rabbi Kiva says, when the Torah says you're obligated to pay for fetuses, the Torah says when men fight, meaning when men fight, but not when animals fight. What do you mean? So it's already exempt. So why do I need a second verse to tell me that you don't have to pay for fetuses? The Torah already says it's a local halacha. It's local to only where men fight with each other, the chayvel, not to where an ox fights with a person. So the Gemara says, "Shab Kamma Rabbi Kiva." Rabbi Kiva seems to have a good argument. Amar Avula B'Rei Ravidi Itzrach. So Ula, the son of Ravidi, says, "No, there's an answer here. What's the answer?" Tzaddik, I would have thought, Anoshim v'lo shvarim hadoimin la'anoshim. Ma anoshim moadim, av shvarim moadim, hatam echayev. Sikasa rachmana ba'al sharnaki de potter. Okay, in other words, I would have thought that Dmei Vladis, the payment for the infants, this would be true of men who are muads, and any animal that's like a man, which would be muads. In other words, a man must pay for the children, and an ox who's a muad does not, but an ox who's a tam does have to pay for a muad, and that's where Rabbi said. That's where it basically comes in. No. Baal Sharnaki, you're exempt. Together? Says Rava here, we have a major problem here. In other words, you mean to say that a tam would be more severe than a muad? Yitziva ba'ara v'giyura b'shmei shmaya. The bow is on the ground and the arrows are in heaven. In other words, it seems counterintuitive to make a tam to make tam more severe than muad. Rava says no. It's true. We need Baal Sharnaki as follows. I would have thought anoshim v'lo shvarim hadoimin la'anoshim. A man, but not oxen similar to men. Okay, in other words, I would think that a man pays for the fetus. An ox who's like a man, meaning an ox who's a muad, also pays for a fetus. Also, I'm sorry, an ox who's like a man is excluded from that payment. Right?
That's a very defeatist attitude.
And an ox who's like a man is excluded, meaning a shar muad, is excluded from the payment of fetuses. And therefore, certainly, a tam is also excluded from the payment. So, tam potter umur chayev. Therefore, the Torah needs to say Baal Sharnaki, meaning the Baal Sharnaki actually makes a muad chayev for Dmei Vladis. In other words, the Torah says, no. What type of animal is excluded? Only a tam is excluded from the fetus, from payment for the fetuses. But a muad would have to pay for the fetuses. Abaya says, okay, according to the same argument, now, very critical point here. What's the story with the pregnant woman? There are two people got into a fight, and one guy intended on striking his friend and ends up striking a woman. And basically, one second, hold on. Yeah, okay. Basically, in one scenario, the pregnancy ends because of his action. His battery ends up terminating with causing the woman to miscarry. And the second, a similar story, which is a few prakim later in Shmais, refers to a woman who was severely embarrassed by the two men fighting. I guess they must have taken, they must have ripped off her clothing by accident. Again, they didn't intend for her; they intended for each other. I'm sorry. In the second scenario, they actually intended to undress her. She was protecting her husband, and they sort of ripped off her clothing. They have to pay for baishas for embarrassment. Okay, but the same terminology is used. Kinotzu anoshim, men were fighting. So according to Rava, that means that when men fight, a muad, right? When men fight, they have to pay for fetuses and they have to pay for embarrassment. When an ox fights, if the ox is a tam, he's exempt, but if he's a muad, he's chayav. Well, if that's the case, then a muad should be chayav for embarrassment as well. When men fight, but not oxen similar to men, meaning shar hamuad, ma anoshim muad and af shar muadim. The kalvachomer latam and diptiri. Everybody should be exempt. And then when the Torah says the owner of the animal is clean, meaning that specifically the tam, which is the reference over there, specifically the tam is stoned, but the owner is exempt from paying for the fetuses or embarrassment for that matter. Umuad chayev, but an animal that's a muad has to pay for both fetuses and for embarrassment. And maybe you'll say, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe a muad does have to pay for embarrassment. Listen, Baal Shornaki, you're basically Amar Potter mid Flodes Umi Baishas. If that's the case, then Rabbi Yosef Lili should be very specific. He should say that not only are you exempt from fetuses, you're also exempt from embarrassment. But a muad would have to pay both for fetuses and for embarrassment. Together? Okay, so Abaya and Rav offer another possibility. So the Torah says as follows: when we talk about the woman who was assaulted and she caused her to miscarry her fetuses, it says v'lo ya'asin, the woman isn't killed. Why is the woman not killed? Because if the woman was killed, what happens? They're exempt from payments. Right? They'll get like a capital punishment instead. So here's the derivation. It's a lot more complicated. Anoshim, when you talk about men, ein asin be'isha ye'anshu. When there's no penalty to a woman, when there's no tragedy to the woman, meaning the woman does not die, then ye'anshu, they have to pay for the fetuses. Yesh asin be'isha, but if the woman does die, lo ye'anshu, they don't pay for the fetuses because they get killed. Capital punishment for murder. V'lo shvarim, but this excludes oxen. The afagav the yesh asin, even where the animal kills a person, ye'anshu, there's still a financial payment. Okay, so in other words, I would think that you would have to pay, an ox would need to pay for would need to pay for the fetuses, even if it kills the woman. So the potter. So therefore the Torah says no, the owner of the animal is exempt from paying for the fetuses. Okay, according to this version, in other words, that you're exempt, and in other words, according to this version, the whole Rabbi Kiva is out the window, right? Rabbi Kiva is trying to say that we already know that an ox is exempt. Well, over here we actually know that an ox is not exempt. In other words, an ox is exempt. 1 second. An ox is exempt from Kamla B'Rabbaneh, basically. That's the exemption. An ox is not exempt from fetuses. That's what Baal Sharonaki teaches you. An ox is exempt from the law of Kamla B'Rabbaneh. If an ox gets killed, you still have to pay for the damages. And that's okay. That sort of was the Havamina, the original thought. And then no, Baal Sharonaki exempts you from that as well. Okay, so now Rabbi Bava comes an interesting argument. Rabbi Bava has an interesting opinion, which is that if you intend that Kollel B'Rabbaneh exists only when there's intention. The general opinion, the consensus is not that way. We said it doesn't make a difference whether there's kavana or no kavana. But Rabbi Bava says no, you need to have the right intention. Meaning, let's say you had intention of striking one friend, you intended on shooting a guy, and the guy ducks at the last minute, and the bullet hits somebody else. You are chayev for nizikin because you're not liable for the death penalty. You have to pay damages. This is not the consensus opinion. Okay, but according to this opinion, it's all dependent on the intention. Rabbi Bava has a different version to this. Anoshim, when you have men, with men, if they had intention to kill each other, and in the end they end up killing the woman, they get a penalty. They have to pay. But if they intended on hitting the woman, there's no penalty, there's no common derabine. But not oxen. Oxen are exempt. But oxen, even if they intended the woman, there still is a financial payment. So therefore the Torah says, yeah, there is a financial payment, but not the fetuses. Because Baal Shanaki, the owner, is exempt from the fetuses. When Rav Chaim came from the north, he brought this mission in his hands. It would be from Eretz Yisrael. Kavaseder about the Rava, like the opinion of Rabbi Barava. Okay. We'll stop here. Tomorrow we get to 2 more opinions of Baal Shanaki, and then we can continue.